The doctor's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Time of death, 3:47 a.m. The room fell silent save for the low, menacing growl emanating from Rex's throat. The German shepherd's muscles tensed as he positioned himself over Corey's motionless body, amber eyes locked on the physician who had just pronounced his master dead. When the orderly stepped forward with a body bag, Rex's growl deepened, his teeth bared in a primal warning that required no translation. "Ma'am, you need to remove this animal," the doctor said firmly to the caretaker. Sarah shook her head. "You don't understand. They've been together 7 years. Rex won't leave him." The German shepherd's ears flattened against his skull as the doctor reached toward Corey's wrist. A flash of fur and teeth forced the man to stumble backward. Outside, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Nobody realized then that the real miracle was about to unfold, that Rex wasn't just guarding a body, he was protecting the faint spark of life only he could sense. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Sergeant Corey Masterson hadn't always been a dog person. As a child, he'd been attacked by a neighbor's Rottweiler, leaving him with both physical and emotional scars. For years, he'd crossed the street at the sight of even the smallest terrier. It was ironic, then, that at 38, his closest companion would be an 85-pound German shepherd with jaws powerful enough to crush bone. Rex had come into Corey's life through what the precinct called divine intervention. As a rookie K9 handler, Corey had been assigned to investigate an illegal puppy mill. Among the dozens of malnourished dogs was a 3-month-old German shepherd with a broken leg, an infection so severe the vet recommended euthanasia. Something in the pup's eyes, a fighting spirit perhaps, had compelled Corey to intervene. "I'll cover the bills," he'd said. "Just save him." The Southdale Police Department wasn't large, but it was tight-knit. Captain James Wilkins ran a disciplined ship, but treated his officers like family. A Vietnam veteran with 30 years on the force, he'd initially scoffed at Corey's request to train his rescued pup for police work. "A charity case won't make the cut," Wilkins had warned. Rex proved him spectacularly wrong, graduating top of his class. By their 5th year together, Corey and Rex had become legendary in the department. 16 drug busts, 7 missing persons found, and 3 outstanding acts of bravery documented in their file. The bond between them transcended the typical handler-canine relationship. Rex lived with Corey in his modest ranch house on Oakwood Drive, slept at the foot of his bed, and had even been the best man, or dog, when Corey married Beth, though the marriage hadn't survived his dedication to the job. Few understood the depth of their connection. Sarah Jenkins, the home health aide assigned to Corey after the incident, was one of the rare exceptions. A former ER nurse with 20 years' experience, she'd witnessed the healing power of animals firsthand. Dr. Eleanor Simmons, however, remained skeptical. A brilliant physician who trusted only what science could prove, she viewed the human-animal bond as simple evolutionary symbiosis, nothing miraculous about it. None of them could have predicted how these perspectives would collide when tragedy struck on that rain-soaked Tuesday in April. The Tuesday morning dawned with ominous dark clouds hanging low over Southdale County. The police radio crackled with static as dispatch relayed information about a stolen vehicle spotted heading toward the interstate. Sergeant Corey Masterson's Crown Victoria hugged the curves of Route 16 as he responded to the call, blue lights flashing against the slate-gray sky. In the specially modified back seat, Rex sat alert, his ears perked forward, intelligent eyes focused on the road ahead. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47 in pursuit of suspects heading eastbound on I-40, Corey reported, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Requesting backup at mile marker 32. The chase had stretched nearly 15 minutes already. In town, Corey had maintained a safe distance, mindful of pedestrians and cross traffic, but now, on the open highway, with fewer risks to civilians, He closed the gap between his cruiser and the black SUV carrying 4 suspects in an armed robbery. "We've got this one, boy," Corey said, meeting Rex's gaze in the rearview mirror. The German Shepherd's steady presence had a calming effect on him during these high-stress situations. Without warning, the SUV veered sharply onto the shoulder, kicking up gravel and dust. Corey eased onto the brake, maintaining control as he followed. Before he could radio their position, all 4 doors of the suspect vehicle flew open. Men in dark clothing scrambled out, abandoning the SUV and heading for the dense tree line bordering the interstate. "Stay, Rex," Corey commanded firmly, unholstering his service weapon. "I'll check it out first." With practiced movements, Corey exited the vehicle and approached the abandoned SUV, weapon drawn. Finding it empty, he turned his attention to the woods where the suspects had fled. The police radio confirmed backup was still 6 minutes out. Protocol dictated waiting, but one suspect had been reported armed with a hostage earlier in the day. Every minute mattered. The woods were eerily quiet as Corey picked his way through the underbrush. Visibility was poor, with the heavy canopy blocking what little daylight filtered through the storm clouds. He moved cautiously, senses heightened, scanning for movement in his peripheral vision, while keeping his back protected. The blow came without warning, a heavy impact to the base of his skull that sent him sprawling forward. As consciousness began to slip away, his training kicked in. With his last moment of clarity, Corey's fingers found the remote release clipped to his belt. He pressed it hard, knowing it would open the specialized K9 door of his cruiser. "Get him, Rex," he whispered, before darkness claimed him. Rex burst from the cruiser the instant the door released, his powerful legs carrying him at 30 miles per hour toward the woods. His nose told him everything. Corey's scent trail led directly to a clearing where his human now lay motionless. Above him stood a large man with a makeshift weapon, preparing to deliver another blow. The German Shepherd launched himself without hesitation, 100 pounds of muscle and determination colliding with the assailant. The man went down hard, the wooden plank flying from his grasp. Rex's training took over. He didn't maul the suspect, but kept him pinned, teeth bared inches from the man's throat. When the attacker produced a knife, Rex released his hold just enough to dodge the blade, then clamped down on the man's forearm. Bones crunched beneath his powerful jaws, and the knife fell to the forest floor. The man howled in pain and managed to kick Rex off, scrambling to his feet and fleeing deeper into the woods. Rex faced a split-second decision his training hadn't covered. Pursue the fleeing suspect or stay with his fallen handler. Instinct overrode training. He returned to Corey's side, nudging his face gently with his nose. When Corey didn't respond, Rex threw his head back and released a howl that echoed through the trees. Officers Rodriguez and Harrison arrived at the scene minutes later, following the distress calls of the German Shepherd. They found Rex standing guard over Corey, who lay unconscious with blood pooling beneath his head. "Jesus," whispered Harrison, approaching carefully. "Rex, it's me. Let me help him." The dog recognized the familiar officer, but remained vigilant, allowing them near Corey only after careful inspection. Rodriguez radioed for an ambulance, while Harrison checked Corey's vitals. "He's alive, but his pulse is weak," Harrison reported. "Head trauma. Looks bad." When the paramedics arrived, Rex initially blocked their access until Officer Rodriguez gently secured his collar. "They're here to help, boy," she soothed, though the dog trembled with anxiety as they loaded Corey onto a stretcher. At Southdale Memorial Hospital, Dr. Eleanor Simmons examined the CT scans with a grim expression. "Severe skull fracture with intracranial bleeding," she explained to Captain Wilkins. "We need to operate immediately to relieve the pressure." In the waiting room, Rex lay at Officer Rodriguez's feet, refusing water or food, his eyes fixed on the emergency room doors where Corey had disappeared. When Dr. Simmons emerged hours later, her surgical mask hanging around her neck, the German Shepherd rose immediately. "He's stable but in a coma," she informed him. "The next 72 hours will be critical." I placed him in a medically induced coma to give his brain time to heal, but I need to be honest, the damage is extensive. There's no guarantee he'll wake up, and if he does, he may not be the same person you knew. The fluorescent lights of the ICU buzzed faintly overhead as Captain James Wilkins stared through the glass window at Corey's still form. 3 days had passed since the surgery, and the steady beep of the heart monitor provided the only evidence that Sergeant Masterson was still among the living. A maze of tubes and wires connected him to machines that breathed for him, fed him, monitored every function of his broken body. "Level with me, Doc," Wilkins said, his voice gruff with emotion he rarely displayed. "What are we really looking at here?" Eleanor Simmons flipped through the chart before answering. "The intracranial pressure has stabilized, which is positive, but the EEG shows minimal brain activity. With injuries this severe—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Long-term coma patients require extensive resources, both medical and financial. The department's insurance will cover intensive care for 30 days, but after that, we'll figure something out," Wilkins interrupted. "Corey's one of ours." Outside the hospital, Rex had become a problem the department wasn't equipped to handle. Officer Rodriguez had taken him home that first night, but the German Shepherd had refused to eat. He'd paced relentlessly, whining at the door, scratching until his paws bled. By morning, he'd chewed through her wooden fence and was found sitting outside the hospital entrance, mud-covered and exhausted. Officer Harrison tried next, but Rex escaped through a second-story window, somehow surviving the fall. The police kennel was equally unsuccessful. Rex bent the steel bars of the enclosure, injuring himself in the process. A veterinarian had to sedate him just to treat the wounds. "He's going to kill himself trying to get back to Corey," Rodriguez explained during the emergency department meeting. "I've never seen anything like it." The situation grew more complicated when the district attorney announced plans to file charges against Arnold Mercer, the man Rex had apprehended in the woods. 3 additional suspects remained at large. With Corey unconscious, Rex represented their best chance at identifying the others, if the dog could be stabilized enough to work. By the 2-week mark, Dr. Simmons called Captain Wilkins with an unorthodox proposal. "Bring the dog," she said simply. "1 visit, supervised. If it settles him down, we might consider limited visitation." The change in Rex was immediate and profound. The moment he entered Corey's hospital room, his frantic energy dissipated. He approached the bed cautiously, sniffing the air, then rested his muzzle gently on Corey's limp hand. He settled onto the floor beside the bed with a deep sigh, his eyes never leaving his handler's face. "I'll be damned," whispered Dr. Simmons. The hospital administration, however, remained unmoved. "We cannot have an animal in the ICU," the hospital director insisted. "The risk of infection, the liability, it's out of the question." As the 3rd week of Corey's coma began, the medical team raised another concern. "Without significant improvement soon, we need to discuss long-term care options," Dr. Simmons explained to Wilkins and Beth, Corey's ex-wife, who had flown in from Phoenix. "A skilled nursing facility would be more appropriate than acute hospital care." "You're giving up on him," Beth accused, tears streaming down her face. Though divorced, she'd never stopped caring for Corey. "We're being realistic," Dr. Simmons countered. "His brain activity shows little improvement. While we don't suggest withdrawing support, transferring him to long-term care would be advisable." Word of Corey's condition spread throughout Southdale County. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about the injured officer and his devoted dog. When Rex was finally allowed daily visits, limited to 15 minutes under handler supervision, a photographer captured the image of the German Shepherd resting his head on Corey's bed, eyes filled with unmistakable sorrow. The photo went viral, touching hearts across the country. Support poured in. A local church organized a fundraiser for Corey's medical expenses. Children sent handmade cards. A petition circulated demanding the hospital create an exception to allow Rex longer visitation rights. The Southdale Police Department established a rotation schedule, ensuring an officer was always with Corey, talking to him, reading him departmental updates, playing his favorite classic rock music. As the 1-month mark approached, the hospital administration presented an ultimatum. Corey would need to be transferred to county long-term care facility within the week. The facility had strict no-pet policies. That evening, an emergency meeting convened in Captain Wilkins' office. Beth sat beside Officer Rodriguez, both women red-knived from crying. Several department members crowded the small space. "I'd like to propose an alternative," said Sarah Jenkins, who had been volunteering at the hospital. With 20 years of home health experience, she outlined a plan to convert Corey's ranch house into a suitable space for home care. "I'm certified in ventilator management and can coordinate with visiting nurses. Most importantly, Rex could remain with him." The logistics were daunting. The house would need modifications: a hospital bed, oxygen equipment, monitors. The cost would be substantial, far beyond what insurance would cover. "We'll make it work," Wilkins decided, his tone brooking no argument. "Rodriguez, start a fundraising page. Harrison, reach out to contractors about necessary modifications. Jenkins, put together a list of equipment and supplies." The community's response exceeded everyone's expectations. A local medical supply company donated a hospital bed. Off-duty officers and firefighters installed a wheelchair ramp over a weekend. A retired nurse volunteered to cover night shifts 3 times a week. Within 6 days, Corey's modest ranch house had been transformed into a functional care unit. On the day of transfer, Dr. Simmons supervised personally. "I still think this is medically inadvisable," she muttered as the ambulance pulled away from the hospital. "But I'll be checking on him regularly." Rex rode in the back of Captain Wilkins' SUV, unusually calm, as if he understood exactly where they were heading. When they arrived at the house, he trotted directly to the modified bedroom where the ambulance crew was setting up Corey's equipment. He found his spot, a plush dog bed positioned beside Corey's hospital bed, and settled in with a deep exhale that sounded almost like relief. "Well, I'll be," Sarah Jenkins said softly, watching the German shepherd's watchful gaze. "It's almost like he knows he's home." The coming of spring brought subtle changes to Corey Masterson's bedroom-turned-medical ward. Sarah Jenkins had placed a vase of daffodils on the windowsill, their cheerful yellow a stark contrast to the clinical white of the medical equipment surrounding Corey's bed. 2 months had passed since his transfer home, and while his physical condition had stabilized, he remained unresponsive to the world around him. Rex had developed a precise routine that the rotating caregivers now accommodated without question. At 6 a.m., he would rise from his bed, stretch, and make a careful inspection of Corey, sniffing along his arm and sometimes gently nudging his hand with his nose. After breakfast, taken only when coaxed and always positioned where he could maintain visual contact with Corey, Rex would assume his post at the foot of the bed. There he would remain, alert and watchful, as nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, and tending to Corey's needs. "I've never seen dedication like this," Sarah confided to Officer Rodriguez during a shift change. "Not even from family members. 2 months without a single response, yet Rex acts like Corey might wake any minute." "That's because he believes he will," Rodriguez replied, setting her duty bag down and shrugging out of her jacket. She'd taken to spending her off days at Corey's house, partly to help with care, and partly because Rex seemed calmer in her presence than with the other officers. Sarah finished updating the medical chart and lowered her voice. "Dr. Simmons stopped by earlier. She's concerned about the continued medication costs. The fundraiser money is starting to run low." The financial strain was becoming increasingly apparent. While the community had rallied magnificently at first, the sustained expense of round-the-clock care was formidable. The department had used emergency funds, officers had donated leave time, and the mayor had authorized a temporary reallocation of the K-9 unit budget, but these were stopgap measures at best. Captain Wilkins is meeting with the Police Benevolent Association tomorrow, Rodriguez said. We'll figure something out. We always do. That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave and Officer Harrison arrived for the night shift, Rex's behavior changed abruptly. The German Shepherd, typically calm during shift changes, began pacing anxiously between Corey's bed and Harrison, his tail low, a low whine building in his throat. "What's gotten into him?" Harrison asked, setting down a bag containing his dinner and overnight gear. Sarah frowned. "I'm not sure. He was fine all day." She checked Corey's monitors, finding his vitals stable. "Maybe he needs to go out again." Harrison shrugged and reached for Rex's leash. "Come on, boy. Let's take a quick walk." But Rex refused to leave the room, planting himself firmly beside Corey's bed. His eyes followed Harrison's every movement with an intensity that seemed almost accusatory. "He's been like this with you before, hasn't he?" Sarah asked, watching the interaction with growing concern. "Once or twice," Harrison admitted. "Dogs get weird sometimes. Don't worry, he'll settle down once you're gone." Sarah hesitated before gathering her things. Something about the situation felt wrong, but she couldn't articulate why. "I've left the evening medications on the counter, already measured out. The instructions are next to them. Call me if anything changes." After she left, Harrison moved through the house with practiced familiarity. He had been part of the care rotation since the beginning, volunteering for the overnight shifts that others avoided. As one of Corey's closest colleagues, his dedication had seemed natural, admirable even. Rex watched from his position as Harrison checked his phone, then glanced at the wall clock. The officer opened the refrigerator, removed a sandwich, and ate it standing at the kitchen counter while scrolling through messages. At precisely 8 p.m., he washed his hands thoroughly and approached the array of medication vials on the counter. The German Shepherd's ears perked forward, his body tensing as Harrison picked up one particular bottle and held it to the light, examining its contents. With deliberate movements, the officer uncapped it, measured out the prescribed dose, then paused, glancing towards the bedroom to confirm Corey was alone. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small envelope and added a white powder to the liquid medication. The growl that erupted from behind him was low and threatening. Harrison whirled to find Rex standing in the kitchen doorway, hackles raised, teeth bared. "Easy, Rex," Harrison said, his voice unnaturally high. "Just preparing Corey's meds. You know the routine." Rex advanced slowly, the growl deepening. When Harrison moved toward the bedroom with the medication cup, the dog blocked his path, his message unmistakable. "Move, you stupid animal," Harrison hissed, all pretense of friendliness gone. He feinted to one side, then the other, but Rex anticipated each movement, refusing to yield. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the unexpected arrival of Captain Wilkins, who'd stopped by to drop off new scheduling information. The front door opened, and Harrison hastily pocketed the envelope, spilling some of the medication in the process. "Everything all right in here?" Wilkins asked, taking in the scene. Harrison frozen in the kitchen, Rex in an aggressive stance. "Fine, sir," Harrison replied quickly. "Rex is just being protective tonight. I was about to give Corey his medication." Wilkins's eyes narrowed as he noted the spilled liquid and Harrison's nervous demeanor. "I'll take over from here, Harrison. You're needed back at the station. We've had a development in the case." "What development?" Harrison asked, his hand unconsciously moving to his pocket. "We can discuss it there," Wilkins said firmly. "I've got this covered." After Harrison's reluctant departure, Wilkins examined the medications carefully, his suspicions aroused by both Rex's behavior and Harrison's uncharacteristic nervousness. Finding nothing immediately obvious, he administered the backup set of medications that Sarah always prepared, rather than the ones Harrison had handled. The next morning, Wilkins shared his concerns with Sarah and Rodriguez. Something's not right. Rex has never reacted that way before, and Harrison was acting strange. He's been volunteering for a lot of overnight shifts, Rodriguez noted. I thought he was just being helpful, but I want the medications Harrison prepared tested, Wilkins decided, and I want someone checking the security footage from the neighborhood cameras. Let's see if he's been coming here at times he wasn't scheduled. As they spoke, Rex maintained his vigil at Corey's bedside. The German Shepherd had developed an uncanny ability to anticipate even the smallest changes in his handler's condition. 3 times in the past month he had alerted caregivers to subtle shifts in Corey's breathing before the monitors detected any change. Sometimes I think he knows something we don't, Sarah admitted. Yesterday morning I found him with his head on Corey's chest, making this odd whimpering sound. 5 minutes later, Corey's oxygen levels dipped slightly. It's like he sensed it coming. The investigation into Harrison's activities proceeded quietly. Laboratory analysis of the spilled medication revealed traces of potassium chloride, a substance that in high doses could cause cardiac arrest while leaving minimal evidence in post-mortem examination. A review of security footage showed Harrison arriving at Corey's house several times during hours when he wasn't scheduled, leaving shortly afterward. But why? Rodriguez asked when Wilkins shared the findings. Harrison and Corey were friends. They came up through the academy together. The answer emerged during a search of Harrison's apartment, authorized after the medication testing. Hidden in a locked desk drawer, investigators found a journal detailing a years-long resentment that had festered like an untreated wound. Harrison had been passed over for promotion 3 times, each time watching as Corey advanced instead. The final entry, dated just before Corey's injury, contained a chilling admission. It should have been me with the department's first K-9 unit. I was the one who trained in handling. Masterson was afraid of dogs until that mutt came along. Everything comes easy to him. Some things need to be balanced. While the investigation continued, Sarah noticed subtle changes in Corey's condition. His reflexes had improved slightly, and twice she had observed his eyelids fluttering in response to Rex's bark, something that hadn't happened before. It's small, but it's progress, she told Dr. Simmons during her weekly visit, and I'd swear he squeezed my hand yesterday when I mentioned Rex's name. Dr. Simmons remained skeptical. The human brain is remarkably complex. What appears to be purposeful movement could be random nerve firing. Don't mistake hope for evidence. But hope was a powerful force in that household. The rotating team of caregivers began talking more to Corey, operating on the belief that somewhere in the darkness of his mind he could hear them. They read him newspaper articles, police reports, and letters from community members. Officer Rodriguez brought in recordings of dispatch calls, familiar sounds from his daily work life. Rex, meanwhile, had taken to bringing his toys to Corey's bedside. First his favorite rope, then a well-worn tennis ball, finally the special reward toy used only during successful police operations. He would place each item carefully on the edge of the bed, then watch expectantly, as if certain that the right object would finally wake his handler. As the 3rd month of home care began, a new routine emerged. Each morning, Sarah would open the curtains, allowing sunlight to fill the room. "Good morning, Sergeant," she would say cheerfully. "Rex has been waiting for you. Another beautiful day in Southdale." She would then help Corey through his passive range of motion exercises, narrating each movement. "Let's get these arms working. Rex wants to play fetch, and you can't throw lying down, can you?" In the afternoons, various department members would visit, bringing updates and small gifts. The nightstand had accumulated an array of items: a new department coffee mug, a framed photo of last year's police picnic, a hand-carved wooden K-9 badge made by the department woodshop instructor. One afternoon in late June, Officer Rodriguez arrived for her shift to find Sarah sitting beside Corey's bed, tears streaming down her face. Rex was positioned halfway on the bed. something they usually discouraged, with his head resting gently on Corey's chest. "What's happened?" Rodriguez asked, alarmed. Sarah looked up, her expression a mixture of joy and disbelief. "Watch," she said softly. She took Corey's hand and squeezed it firmly. "Corey, can you hear me? Squeeze back if you can." The movement was subtle but unmistakable. Corey's fingers tightened briefly around Sarah's. "He's been doing it consistently for the past hour," Sarah explained, her voice breaking. "And watch this." She turned to the German Shepherd. "Rex, where's Corey?" The dog immediately raised his head and nudged Corey's cheek with his nose. In response, Corey's head turned slightly toward the touch. "It's not random," Sarah insisted. "He's responding to Rex more than anything else. It's like he's following him out of the darkness." And the Simmons arrived within the hour, conducting a thorough neurological assessment. For the first time since the injury, she documented definitive signs of emerging consciousness: eye movement tracking, a pen light, consistent hand squeezes in response to commands, and reflexive responses to painful stimuli. "It's remarkable progress," she acknowledged, updating her notes. "He's transitioning from vegetative to minimally conscious state. There's still a very long road ahead, but this is significantly more than I expected, given the severity of his injury." The news energized everyone involved in Corey's care. The department organized a new fundraising drive, this time for rehabilitation equipment. A physical therapist volunteered services twice weekly. Sarah developed a more intensive stimulation schedule, incorporating familiar sounds, scents, and textures from Corey's police work. Rex seemed to intuitively understand the change in his handler's condition. His behavior shifted from watchful guardian to active participant in Corey's recovery. He began bringing specific objects to the bed when instructed, his leash when it was time for Corey's arms to be exercised, his water bowl before mouth care, his badge toy during visits from department members. "He's creating associations," the physical therapist observed, "helping Corey connect objects with activities. It's exactly what we try to do with brain injury patients." As July turned to August, Corey's progress continued. He could now open his eyes for extended periods, though his gaze often seemed unfocused. He had begun making sounds, not words yet, but purposeful vocalizations that suggested he was trying to communicate. Most significantly, he had started responding specifically to Rex, turning his head when the dog barked and visibly relaxing when Rex lay beside him. The investigation into Harrison's actions had resulted in his arrest and suspension from the force. The evidence was damning: the journal, the tampered medications, security footage showing him accessing the drug storage at the station. When confronted, he had finally confessed to tampering with Corey's IV at the hospital before the home transfer and to making multiple attempts afterward. Each time, Rex's vigilance had prevented success. "The dog knew," Harrison had said bitterly during questioning. "Somehow he always knew." On a warm Tuesday morning in August, Sarah was helping Corey with his breakfast, pure foods now that he could swallow safely, when Rex suddenly became agitated. The German Shepherd jumped up, ran to the window, then back to the bed, barking sharply. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, setting aside the feeding syringe. Rex continued his urgent barking, running between Corey and the door. Sarah checked Corey's monitors, finding all readings within normal range, then looked back at the increasingly frantic dog. "Is someone here?" she wondered aloud, moving toward the window to check. The sound that stopped her was small, barely audible above Rex's barking, but unmistakable. A word, raspy from disuse, but clear. "Rex." Sarah turned slowly to find Corey's eyes open and focused, his gaze following the German Shepherd's movement across the room. His lips moved again, struggling to form words that had been locked away for months. "Good, boy." The day's physical therapy session had been Corey's most challenging yet. Under the watchful eye of Jessica Wells, a rehabilitation specialist who combined military precision with boundless encouragement, he had attempted to stand for the first time since regaining consciousness. What should have been a simple act, rising from seated to standing, had become an epic battle between mind and muscles that refused to cooperate. "You're doing great, Sergeant," Jessica had insisted, supporting much of his weight as his legs trembled uncontrollably beneath him. "Just 5 more seconds." 5 seconds had stretched into an eternity, sweat pouring down Corey's face as he fought to remain upright. When Jessica finally guided him back to the wheelchair, the defeat felt crushing. 3 months after first speaking Rex's name, and 6 months after the attack, Corey still couldn't stand on his own. "This isn't working," he had muttered, the words slurring slightly as they often did when he was exhausted. The speech therapist had assured him this would improve with time, but Corey's patience was wearing thin. Every day brought the same routine. Exercises that left him depleted, small victories overshadowed by the mountain still to climb, and the gnawing fear that he would never return to the man he once was. As twilight descended over Southdale, Sarah found Corey sitting by the bedroom window, staring out at the neighborhood where children played under the watchful eyes of parents. Normal lives unfolding in normal ways, a reality that seemed increasingly distant to him. "You should try to rest," Sarah suggested gently, setting a glass of water on the side table. "You pushed hard today." Corey didn't respond immediately. Rex lay at his feet, the German shepherd's chin resting on his paws, but his amber eyes tracking every movement in the room with characteristic vigilance. The dog had developed an uncanny sensitivity to Corey's moods, pressing closer when depression threatened to overwhelm him, creating playful distractions when frustration mounted. "I heard Jessica talking to you in the hallway," Corey finally said, his voice low. "She thinks I should lower my expectations." Sarah pulled up a chair beside him. "That's not exactly what she said. She suggested adjusting your timeline. Your brain injury was severe, Corey. Recovery isn't linear." "It's been 6 months," he replied, an edge of bitterness creeping into his voice. "Harrison will be sentenced before I can even walk to the courthouse to see it happen." The mention of Harrison's name caused Rex to lift his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The dog had not forgotten the man who had tried to harm his handler. During Harrison's preliminary hearing, when prosecutors had shown photographs of the crime scene, Rex had needed to be removed from the courtroom after lunging toward the defendant's table. "His sentencing isn't for another month," Sarah reminded Corey. "And Dr. Simmons says your progress is remarkable considering the extent of your injuries." Corey turned from the window, his hazel eyes troubled. "And if this is all there is, if I never get back to the force, what then?" The question hung heavy in the air, one that Sarah had no easy answer for. Instead, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "One day at a time, remember? That's what got you this far." Later that evening, as Sarah prepared Corey's medications, she noticed Rex's behavior change. The German shepherd had been resting in his customary spot at the foot of Corey's bed, but suddenly raised his head, ears perked forward, body tensing slightly. "What is it, boy?" she asked, following his gaze to Corey, who appeared to be sleeping peacefully. Rex rose and approached Corey's side, sniffing intently along his arm and face. When Sarah checked the monitors, all readings appeared normal, but Rex's agitation continued to build. He began pacing between the bed and the door, whining softly. Sarah had learned to trust the dog's instincts. She approached Corey and gently touched his shoulder. "Corey, are you feeling all right?" His eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in his expression. "Something's wrong," he managed to say, the words slightly slurred. Sarah immediately checked his blood pressure. It was elevated, though not alarmingly so. His pupils responded normally to light and his oxygen levels remained stable. By all medical indicators, there was nothing to be concerned about. Yet Rex's behavior suggested otherwise. The German shepherd returned to Corey's side, pressing his nose against his chest, then looking up at Sarah with an urgency she couldn't ignore. "I'm calling Dr. Simmons," she decided, reaching for her phone. Better to appear overcautious than to ignore what might be a genuine warning. Dr. Simmons answered on the third ring, her voice brisk but attentive as Sarah described the situation. His vital signs are stable, but Rex is showing the same behavior he did before the seizure 3 weeks ago. Corey says he feels dizzy and... Wait. Sarah paused, watching as Corey's expression suddenly changed, his hand rising to his head. He's in pain. Significant pain from the look of it. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Dr. Simmons replied. In the meantime, administer 5 mils of diazepam from the emergency kit. It might prevent a seizure from developing. Keep him calm and lying flat. As Sarah hung up, Corey's condition deteriorated rapidly. The mild confusion gave way to increasing agitation, his words becoming more garbled and his movements jerky. Sarah administered the medication as directed and tried to keep him still, but his distress only intensified. "My head," he groaned, pressing his palms against his temples, "like, exploding." Rex's anxiety escalated alongside Corey's pain. The German shepherd positioned himself beside the bed, his body tense as if preparing to act, though what action he might take remained unclear. Sarah spoke soothingly to both of them as she monitored Corey's vital signs, which now showed a dangerous spike in blood pressure. 18 minutes after her call, Dr. Simmons arrived, medical bag in hand and concern etched on her face. She conducted a quick assessment, her experienced hands moving efficiently as she checked Corey's pupils, reflexes, and the surgical site on his skull. "There's increased swelling," she announced, her fingers gently probing the area around the healed incision. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately. I'm concerned about potential rebleeding or increased intracranial pressure." Sarah moved quickly, gathering Corey's emergency bag while Dr. Simmons called for an ambulance. Rex remained vigilant throughout, his eyes tracking every movement in the room, but never straying far from Corey, who had begun to drift in and out of consciousness. "Stay with us, Corey," Dr. Simmons urged, administering another medication through his IV port. "The ambulance will be here any minute." When the paramedics arrived, they worked with practiced efficiency, transferring Corey to a stretcher and securing his IV lines. As they prepared to move him, Rex positioned himself at the head of the stretcher, clearly intending to accompany his handler. "The dog can't come in the ambulance," one paramedic stated firmly. Dr. Simmons glanced at Rex, then at Sarah. "Can you follow us with him?" "I don't think we should separate them, but protocols are clear." The journey to Southdale Memorial Hospital seemed interminable to Sarah, who drove behind the ambulance with Rex sitting anxiously in the back seat. The German shepherd whined continuously, his eyes fixed on the ambulance's red lights as if maintaining visual contact with Corey could somehow protect him. At the hospital, Corey was whisked directly to radiology for an emergency CT scan. The results confirmed Dr. Simmons' fears. A small but significant hemorrhage had developed at the site of his original injury, creating pressure that could trigger a catastrophic seizure if left untreated. "He needs surgery," the neurosurgeon explained to Sarah and Captain Wilkins, who had arrived minutes after being notified. "The bleeding needs to be addressed immediately to prevent further damage." "Do whatever is necessary," Wilkins authorized, his normally commanding voice subdued by concern. Sarah found herself in the familiar purgatory of a hospital waiting room, the same space where she had sat months earlier when Corey had first been injured. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Officer Rodriguez had arrived to provide support, and outside the hospital, Rex waited in Rodriguez's patrol car. Department policy prohibiting animals inside except in specific circumstances. 3 hours passed before the neurosurgeon emerged, surgical cap still on his head and fatigue evident in his posture. "We've controlled the bleeding," he reported, "but there was significant swelling. We've placed him in a medically induced coma to give his brain time to recover and prevent further seizure activity." "A coma?" Sarah repeated, her voice breaking. "After everything he's been through?" "It's temporary," the surgeon assured her. "Days rather than months. But I want to be clear, this is a serious setback. We won't know the full impact until we bring him out of sedation." The question no one wanted to ask hung in the air. Would Corey lose the progress he had fought so hard to achieve? Would the man who had struggled to form complete sentences, who had celebrated standing for 30 seconds just that morning, find himself starting the arduous journey from the beginning? As night fell, Sarah stepped outside to check on Rex. Officer Rodriguez had remained with the German Shepherd, who sat alert in the back of the patrol car, eyes fixed on the hospital entrance. "He hasn't settled at all," Rodriguez reported. "I tried to take him back to my place, but he nearly tore through the restraint system when I started driving away from the hospital." Sarah approached the car and opened the back door. Rex immediately pressed his nose into her hand, sniffing intently, as if searching for traces of Corey. "He's still with us," she assured the dog, stroking his head. "But he's sick again. The doctors are helping him." Whether Rex understood her words was impossible to know, but he seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. He leaned his substantial weight against her briefly, then resumed his vigilant posture, amber eyes fixed on the hospital doors. "I don't think he's going anywhere," Rodriguez observed. "I'll stay with him tonight. My shift doesn't start until noon tomorrow." By morning, word of Corey's setback had spread throughout the department. Officers stopped by throughout the day, bringing coffee for Rodriguez and Sarah, offering support and speaking gentle words to Rex, who acknowledged their presence, but remained focused on his self-appointed watch. Then Simmons emerged from the hospital shortly after noon, her face drawn with fatigue after monitoring Corey through the night. She approached Rex cautiously. Their relationship had evolved over months from professional skepticism to grudging respect. "His intracranial pressure has stabilized," she reported to Sarah and Rodriguez. "That's a positive sign. We'll continue the medically induced coma for at least 24 more hours to allow the swelling to reduce further." She glanced at Rex, who had risen to his feet at her approach. "How's he doing out here?" "Hasn't eaten or taken water," Rodriguez replied. "Won't leave the property." Dr. Simmons frowned. "That's not healthy. He needs to maintain his strength." "You try telling him that," Rodriguez said with a small smile. "He's as stubborn as his handler." Later that afternoon, the hospital administrator made an unexpected appearance in the parking lot where Rex continued his vigil. Dr. Simmons had returned to check on Corey and found herself intercepted by the administrator on her way out. "That's the dog from the news stories, isn't it?" the administrator asked, gesturing toward Rex. "The one who detected Sergeant Masterson's seizure before it happened?" "Yes," Dr. Simmons confirmed. "He's been out here since Corey arrived. Refuses to leave." The administrator observed the German Shepherd thoughtfully. "My predecessor had very strict policies about animals in the facility, but given the circumstances, perhaps an exception could be justified on therapeutic grounds." Dr. Simmons raised an eyebrow, surprised by the suggestion. "You're considering allowing him inside? That would be unprecedented." "So is a police dog alerting to a seizure before medical equipment could detect it," the administrator replied. "Sometimes unprecedented situations call for unprecedented responses." That evening, under strict protocols developed hastily by the infection control team, Rex was permitted to enter the hospital through a service entrance. After being thoroughly bathed with a veterinary-approved antimicrobial solution and fitted with special booty covers for his paws, he was escorted to the ICU, where Corey lay unconscious, connected to a ventilator and surrounded by monitoring equipment. The nurses watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern as the German Shepherd was led to Corey's bedside. Dr. Simmons had expected Rex to show distress at seeing his handler in such a state, but the dog displayed remarkable composure. He sniffed carefully along Corey's arm, nudged his hand gently with his nose, then settled on the floor beside the bed with a deep sigh. "He can stay for 15 minutes, the charge nurse stated firmly. "Then he needs to leave." Dr. Simmons nodded her agreement, though she suspected removing Rex might prove challenging when the time came. She remained in the room, monitoring both Corey's vital signs and the dog's behavior. To her surprise, the monitors showed a slight but measurable decrease in Corey's heart rate and blood pressure after Rex's arrival, evidence of the calming effect his presence provided, even in unconsciousness. When the 15 minutes expired, the charge nurse returned, clearly expecting resistance. "Time's up," she announced. Dr. Simmons approached Rex, preparing to coax him away from the bedside. To her surprise, the German Shepherd rose without prompting and followed her toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, looking back at Corey's still form, then continued into the hallway. "But that's one well-trained animal," the nurse remarked. "He's more than well-trained," Dr. Simmons replied. "He's exceptional." The following morning, when the neurological team arrived to assess Corey's condition, they were greeted by an unexpected sight. During the night shift, the night nurse had spotted Rex sitting once again outside the hospital entrance, shivering in the unseasonable cold front that had moved through Southdale. Against protocol, but moved by compassion, she had allowed him inside again. Now, as the morning sun filtered through the blinds, the German Shepherd lay curled in the small space beside Corey's legs on the hospital bed. He watched the doctors calmly, making no move to leave his position. "Dr. Simmons," the neurologist began, professional outrage evident in his tone, "why is there a dog in my patient's bed?" Before she could answer, a small sound came from the head of the bed. The neurologist froze, then moved quickly to Corey's side. Despite the heavy sedation, Corey's fingers twitched slightly, and another sound emerged. Unmistakably, an attempt to say Rex's name. "That's impossible," the neurologist muttered, checking the medication levels. "He's under deep sedation. He shouldn't be capable of voluntary movement or vocalization." Yet as they watched, Corey's hand moved again, fingers stretching in Rex's direction. The German Shepherd shifted position, placing his head gently on Corey's chest, and the response was immediate. Corey's breathing pattern changed, becoming calmer and more regular. The medical team exchanged bewildered glances. Neurological science suggested that under his current level of sedation, Corey should be completely unresponsive to external stimuli, yet somehow, through layers of medication and injury, he had sensed Rex's presence and fought through the chemical restraints to acknowledge it. "I've never seen anything like this," the neurologist admitted, his scientific skepticism temporarily suspended by the evidence before him. "Perhaps," Dr. Simmons suggested quietly, "there are connections our medical textbooks haven't yet documented." As she spoke, the monitors tracking Corey's intracranial pressure showed an unexpected change, a further decrease to nearly normal levels. The medical team watched in astonishment as his vital signs continued to stabilize, all in the presence of the German Shepherd, who maintained his gentle contact. "I think," Dr. Simmons said with newfound conviction, "we're going to need to revise our visitation protocols." The crisp autumn air filtered through the partially open window as Sarah Jenkins adjusted Corey's pillows. 3 weeks had passed since that miraculous morning when he'd spoken Rex's name, and his progress, while steady, had been punctuated by frustrating setbacks. Today had been particularly difficult. The physical therapy session had left him exhausted, his body trembling with exertion as he'd struggled to maintain a sitting position for just 5 minutes. "You're pushing too hard," Sarah had cautioned, but the determination in Corey's eyes told her that her words were falling on deaf ears. The stubborn independence that had made him an excellent police officer now manifested as an almost reckless drive to recover, heedless of his body's limitations. Rex lay at the foot of the bed, his amber eyes tracking every movement in the room. The German Shepherd had developed an uncanny ability to anticipate Corey's needs, often alerting Sarah to problems before they became apparent. When Corey's breathing grew labored, Rex would paw gently at the oxygen equipment. When pain medications wore off, causing Corey's face to tighten almost imperceptibly, Rex would nudge Sarah's hand toward the medication chart. "We should try to get some rest," Sarah suggested, noting the pallor beneath Corey's tan. Dr. Simmons is stopping by this evening to check your progress." Corey nodded weakly, his speech still limited to short phrases and often slurred. "Tired," he admitted, the single word carrying the weight of months of struggle. As Sarah dimmed the lights and prepared to leave the room, Rex suddenly lifted his head, ears alert and forward. A low whine built in his throat, growing in urgency until he leapt from the bed and began pacing between Corey and the bedroom door. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, immediately checking Corey's vital signs. Temperature normal, blood pressure slightly elevated but within acceptable parameters, oxygen levels stable. Nothing in the monitors explained Rex's agitation. Corey's eyes followed his dog, confusion giving way to concern. "Wrong," he managed to say, his hand trembling as he reached for Rex. The German shepherd returned to the bedside, pressing his nose against Corey's chest, then looking up at Sarah with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. She'd seen that look before, in the emergency room. Animals somehow sensing what sophisticated medical equipment could not. "I'm calling Dr. Simmons," she decided, reaching for her phone. "Better safe than sorry." Before she could dial, Corey's body suddenly went rigid, his back arched off the bed, arms and legs stiffening as his eyes rolled back. The seizure took hold with violent intensity, monitors blaring as his oxygen levels plummeted and his heart rate spiked dangerously. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, turning Corey onto his side, ensuring his airway remained clear as foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. Rex backed away, barking frantically, then bolted from the room. Sarah heard the front door bang open, the special lever handle they had installed for the dog allowing him easy exit. "Don't you dare die on me, Sergeant," Sarah muttered, administering the emergency anti-seizure medication Dr. Simmons had left for precisely this scenario. The convulsions showed no sign of abating, Corey's face taking on a bluish tinge despite the oxygen flowing through his nasal cannula. She was reaching for the phone to call 911 when she heard Rex's frantic barking outside, followed by the screech of tires on pavement. Moments later, Dr. Eleanor Simmons burst through the door, medical bag in hand, her face flushed from running. "Your dog nearly caused an accident," she said breathlessly, taking in the scene. "He ran right into the street in front of my car, then led me here. How long has he been seizing?" "Almost 4 minutes," Sarah replied, stepping back to give the doctor room. "I've administered the Ativan, but there's no change." Dr. Simmons worked quickly, checking Corey's pupils, then drawing up additional medication. "This is status epilepticus," she explained, injecting the drug directly into Corey's IV port. "Continuous seizure activity. Can cause permanent brain damage if not stopped quickly." The minutes that followed were tense, both women watching for any sign that the medication was taking effect. Rex had returned to the room and positioned himself in the corner, his eyes never leaving Corey's thrashing form. "Come on, Corey," Dr. Simmons murmured, preparing a third medication as the second failed to halt the seizure. "Don't let all this progress be for nothing." 7 minutes after the seizure began, Corey's body finally went limp. The harsh sound of labored breathing filled the room, but the monitors showed his vital signs beginning to stabilize. "We need to get him to the hospital," Dr. Simmons decided, already dialing for an ambulance. "He needs a CT scan and continuous monitoring. This could indicate rebleeding or increased intracranial pressure." Sarah nodded, tears of relief and renewed fear mingling on her cheeks. As she gathered Corey's emergency bag, she noticed Rex watching her with what could only be described as human-like concern. "He'll be okay," she assured the dog, hoping she wasn't making a promise she couldn't keep. The ambulance arrived within minutes, paramedics efficiently transferring Corey to a stretcher. Rex followed their every movement, positioning himself at the head of the stretcher as they prepared to move. "The dog can't come," one paramedic stated flatly. "Try telling him that," Dr. Simmons replied, watching as Rex planted himself firmly beside Corey's unconscious form. In the end, Officer Rodriguez arrived in time to take responsibility for Rex, promising to bring him to the hospital later. The separation was wrenching. Rex strained against Rodriguez's grip, howling as the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away with lights flashing but sirens silent. There was no need for speed now. The emergency had passed, leaving only the grim aftermath to address. At Southdale Memorial Hospital, Corey was wheeled directly to radiology for an emergency CT scan. The images revealed what Dr. Simmons had feared. A small but significant bleed had developed in the area of his original injury, creating pressure that had triggered the seizure. "He needs surgery," the neurosurgeon explained to Captain Wilkins, who had arrived minutes after receiving Sarah's call. "We need to evacuate the blood and reduce the pressure. Without intervention, he'll continue seizing, and each episode increases the risk of permanent damage." "Do whatever's necessary," Wilkins authorized, his usual commanding presence diminished by concern for his officer. The surgery lasted 3 hours, the surgical team working meticulously to address the bleed without disturbing the healing that had already occurred. When the neurosurgeon finally emerged, his expression was guarded. "We've controlled the immediate threat," he explained to the small group gathered in the waiting room. "But there's significant swelling. We've placed him in a medically induced coma to give his brain time to recover." "A coma?" Sarah repeated, her voice breaking. "After everything? We're back at the beginning?" "Not quite," the surgeon clarified. "This is temporary. Days, not months. But I need to be clear. This setback is serious. The areas of his brain responsible for his recent progress have been affected. Some of his recovery may be lost." Outside the hospital, Officer Rodriguez sat on a bench with Rex beside her, the German Shepherd's head resting heavily on her leg. She'd been unable to convince hospital security to allow the dog inside, despite showing Rex's service credentials. "He saved Corey's life again," she told the security guard. "If he hadn't alerted us—" "Policy is policy," the guard had replied, unmoved. "No animals in the ICU." As night fell, the hospital's administrator made her final rounds. Approaching Corey's room, she found Dr. Simmons reviewing his latest readings. "How is he?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice, despite her usual professional distance. "Stable for now," Dr. Simmons replied. "The next 24 hours will tell us more." The administrator nodded, then looked out the window to the parking lot below. Her gaze fell on Officer Rodriguez, still sitting on the bench despite the late hour, Rex a faithful shadow at her side. "That's the dog, isn't it? The one from the news stories?" "Yes," Dr. Simmons confirmed. "He's been out there since Corey arrived. Rodriguez has tried twice to take him home, but he refuses to leave the property." The administrator was silent for a long moment, watching the pair through the window. "My predecessor would never have considered this," she finally said. "But these are exceptional circumstances. Bring the dog to the service elevator in 30 minutes. I'll arrange a staff escort and isolation protocols." When the neurological team arrived the following morning to assess Corey's condition and possibly begin the process of reducing his sedation, they found Dr. Simmons already present, reviewing his chart with a critical eye. "His intracranial pressure readings are better than expected," she reported. "The anti-inflammatory medications seem to be working effectively." The lead neurologist nodded, then froze as his gaze fell on Corey's bed. There, curled in the small space beside Corey's legs, lay Rex. The German Shepherd watched the doctors calmly, making no move to leave his position. "Dr. Simmons," the neurologist began, his tone a mixture of disbelief and professional outrage, "why is there a dog in my patient's bed?" Before she could answer, a weak noise came from the head of the bed. Not quite a word, but a deliberate vocalization. Corey's eyes remained closed, his body still under heavy sedation, but his fingers twitched against the blanket. "That's impossible," the neurologist muttered, quickly checking Corey's medication levels. "He shouldn't be capable of any voluntary movement with this level of sedation." Dr. Simmons moved to Corey's side, taking his hand. "Corey, can you hear me?" No response came, but when Rex shifted position, placing his head gently on Corey's chest, another sound emerged, clearer this time, unmistakably an attempt at the dog's name. The medical team exchanged bewildered glances. By all established neurological principles, Corey should have been completely unresponsive. Yet somehow, through layers of medication and injury, he had sensed his dog's presence and fought through the chemical restraints to acknowledge it. "I've practiced medicine for 30 years, the senior neurologist said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this." "Then perhaps," Dr. Simmons suggested, her scientific skepticism finally giving way to something approaching belief, "it's time we reconsider what we think we know about consciousness, connection, and healing." The morning light filtered through the partially open blinds of Corey's hospital room, creating golden stripes across the sterile white sheets. 4 days had passed since the emergency surgery, days marked by uncertainty as the medical team carefully monitored his condition while maintaining the medically induced coma. Dr. Simmons had explained that this artificial unconsciousness protected his brain, allowing it to heal without the demands of awareness or movement. For the hospital staff, the past few days had represented a remarkable shift in policy and perspective. The German Shepherd, who had initially been smuggled in during the night shift, had become a sanctioned visitor, complete with a special ID badge attached to his collar that marked him as therapy support Rex Masterson. Hospital personnel who had once rigidly enforced the no animals policy now stepped aside respectfully when Sarah or Officer Rodriguez brought the dog for his scheduled visits. "I'm going to begin reducing the sedation today," Dr. Simmons informed Sarah as they stood outside Corey's room. "The swelling has decreased significantly, and his intracranial pressure has stabilized at normal levels." "What should we expect?" Sarah asked, her voice betraying the anxiety she tried to hide. With each medical crisis, the unspoken fear grew stronger. Would this be the setback that Corey couldn't overcome? "It's impossible to predict with certainty," Dr. Simmons replied honestly. "Best case scenario, he wakes gradually over the next 12 to 24 hours, with cognitive function similar to his pre-seizure state. Worst case," she hesitated. "Let's focus on the positive possibilities for now." Inside the room, Rex lay in his now customary position at the foot of Corey's bed. The hospital had provided a special pad that protected the bedding while giving the German Shepherd a comfortable place to rest. Though still vigilant, Rex had relaxed his guard somewhat since being officially allowed into the hospital. He accepted gentle pats from nurses and even took treats from the elderly volunteer who delivered flowers to patients. As Dr. Simmons adjusted Corey's medication, Sarah settled into the chair beside the bed. She had taken a leave of absence from her other nursing duties to focus entirely on Corey's care, a decision supported by the unexpected influx of donations from community members who had followed his story in the local news. "The neurologist mentioned something interesting yesterday," Sarah said, watching as Dr. Simmons checked Corey's pupil reactions. "He said they've documented unusual brain activity when Rex is present, different patterns than when he's alone." Dr. Simmons nodded. "It's quite remarkable. Even under sedation, his brain shows increased activity in the limbic system, the emotional center, when the dog is nearby. It's as if some part of him recognizes Rex's presence, even when consciousness is suppressed." "Their connection is something special," Sarah agreed. "I've worked with therapy animals before, but nothing like this." The day progressed slowly, each hour bringing subtle changes as the sedative medications gradually cleared from Corey's system. By late afternoon, he began showing signs of emerging awareness. Increased respiratory rate, small movements of his fingers and toes, changes in his facial expression when spoken to. Captain Wilkins arrived shortly after 5, having come directly from the courthouse. His expression was uncharacteristically satisfied as he entered the room, nodding a greeting to Sarah and Dr. Simmons. "Harrison's sentencing is complete," he announced without preamble. 20 years, no possibility of parole for 15. The judge wasn't inclined toward leniency after hearing the full evidence. Sarah exhaled slowly, releasing tension she hadn't realized she was holding. "That's good. That's justice. As close as we'll get," Wilkins agreed. His gaze shifted to Corey's still form. "Any change?" "We're reducing sedation gradually," Dr. Simmons explained. "He's showing early signs of awareness, but full consciousness may take hours yet." Wilkins nodded, then lowered himself into the chair opposite Sarah. Though typically uncomfortable with hospital settings, he had become a regular visitor during Corey's treatment, often reading aloud from department reports or simply sitting in stoic companionship. As evening approached, Rex suddenly lifted his head from his paws, ears perked forward with intense focus. Both Sarah and Captain Wilkins noticed the change in his demeanor. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, following the German Shepherd's gaze to Corey. The monitor tracking Corey's brain activity showed a sudden increase in electrical patterns, the regular waves giving way to a more complex, active display. Dr. Simmons, who had stepped out briefly, returned to find all eyes on the monitor. "That's a good sign," she confirmed, moving to Corey's bedside to check his responses. "He's transitioning toward consciousness." Rex rose from his position and moved closer to Corey's head, his nose gently touching his handler's cheek. The response was subtle but unmistakable. Corey's head turned slightly toward the contact. "Corey," Sarah called softly, "can you hear us?" For several moments there was no further response, then slowly Corey's eyelids fluttered, struggling against the weight of lingering sedation. When they finally opened, his gaze was unfocused, drifting across the ceiling before settling on Rex's face, inches from his own. Recognition dawned slowly in his eyes. His lips moved, forming a word without sound at first, then managing a hoarse whisper. "Rex." The German Shepherd's tail swept back and forth in a gentle wag, his whole body seeming to vibrate with contained excitement. He nudged Corey's cheek again, eliciting a weak smile. Dr. Simmons moved forward, conducting a quick neurological assessment. "Corey, do you know where you are?" His brow furrowed with concentration. "Hospital," he managed after a moment, the words slurred but intelligible. "That's right. You're at Southdale Memorial. You had a seizure and needed surgery, but you're doing well now." She held up 3 fingers. "How many fingers am I holding up?" Corey blinked slowly, focusing with visible effort. 3. Captain Wilkins stepped closer to the bed, relief evident in his usually stoic features. "Welcome back, Sergeant." Corey's gaze shifted to his superior officer, confusion momentarily clouding his expression. "Harrison?" he asked, the single word carrying a complex question. "Sentenced today," Wilkins replied. 20 years. He won't hurt anyone else." A subtle tension seemed to release from Corey's body at this news. He reached a shaking hand toward Rex, who immediately pressed his head into the touch. For several minutes no one spoke, allowing Corey time to process his surroundings and situation. Finally, Sarah offered him a small sip of water, helping to ease the dryness in his throat from intubation. "Do you remember what happened before the seizure?" she asked gently. Corey frowned, searching fragmented memories. "Therapy. Tried to stand. Then headache." His words were halting, but clearer than Dr. Simmons had dared hope, given the circumstances. "That's right," she confirmed. "You were making excellent progress in physical therapy when you developed increased pressure in your brain that triggered the seizure." A shadow of frustration crossed Corey's face. "Starting over?" he asked, the question revealing his deepest fear, that each medical setback erased hard-won progress. "Not from the beginning," Dr. Simmons assured him. "The surgery was successful and your brain activity shows strong function. There will be some recovery time, but you're not back to square one." As the initial assessment continued, it became increasingly clear that while Corey had not lost all his progress, there were concerning gaps. He struggled to remember events from the weeks preceding the seizure, and the fluidity of speech he had worked so hard to regain had deteriorated somewhat. His right side showed increased weakness, particularly in his hand and leg. When Dr. Simmons completed her examination, her expression was guardedly optimistic. "Overall, this is a better outcome than we might have expected. There's definitely some impact from the rebleeding, but your fundamental cognitive functions are intact. With therapy and time, I believe you can regain what's been affected." Captain Wilkins excused himself shortly afterward, promising to return the following day with updates from the department. As he reached the door, he turned back briefly. "The K-9 unit asked me to tell Rex they're holding his position open." A rare smile crossed his face. "Can't seem to find another dog that meets his standards." After the captain's departure, Sarah helped Corey take a few more sips of water and adjusted his position for comfort. As his initial surge of awareness began to fade, fatigue evident in his heavy eyelids, she prepared to let him rest. But before she could step away, he caught her hand, weakly. "Rex knew," he said, the words faint but clear. "Before seizure. He always knows." Sarah nodded, understanding the truth behind his simple statement. "Yes, he does. That's why he's allowed in the hospital now. They created a special exception for him." A ghost of a smile touched Corey's lips before his eyes closed completely, sleep claiming him as the day's events and lingering medications took their toll. Rex settled back into his position, amber eyes maintaining their faithful watch even as his handler slept. Alone with her thoughts, Sarah reflected on Corey's words. Rex knew. The simple phrase encapsulated something profound, an awareness that extended beyond human understanding, a connection that defied medical explanation. In a world where science sought to classify and measure every phenomenon, Rex's intuitive bond with Corey remained beautifully unquantifiable. She glanced at the sleeping German shepherd, wondering, not for the first time, what perceptions existed behind those intelligent eyes, what senses operated beyond human capability. Whatever the explanation, she had witnessed enough to know that Rex possessed something extraordinary. A gift that had repeatedly saved Corey's life when human medicine failed. The autumn leaves had given way to the first dusting of snow by the time Corey Masterson stood at the front of the Southdale Police Department's community room. His gait was still unsteady, requiring the support of a cane, and his speech retained a slight slur that became more pronounced when he was tired. But he stood tall in his dress uniform, the polished buttons and pressed creases a testament to how far he had come. "6 months ago," he began, his words carefully measured, "I wouldn't have believed I'd be standing here today." At his side, Rex sat at perfect attention, his service vest gleaming with a newly added medal for exceptional service. "I wouldn't be here at all if not for this extraordinary partner." The room was filled to capacity. Officers from neighboring precincts, medical personnel who had contributed to his care, community members who had followed his journey, and journalists documenting what many now called the miracle of Southdale. Captain Wilkins sat in the front row, beside Dr. Eleanor Simmons, whose skepticism had evolved into a profound respect for the bond between handler and dog. "Many of you know pieces of my story," Corey continued, his hand dropping instinctively to rest on Rex's head. "The attack, the coma, the seizure, and finally the long road back. But what the headlines didn't capture was the constant in all of it. Rex never gave up on me, even when medical science suggested he should." Dr. Simmons nodded slightly, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. She had been among the most vocal advocates for moving Corey to long-term care, believing his chances of meaningful recovery were minimal. Now she stood as one of his strongest supporters and the author of a forthcoming paper on animal-assisted recovery in traumatic brain injury cases. "Today I'm proud to announce that the Southdale Memorial Hospital Board has unanimously approved the Masterson Protocol for animal companions in critical care situations." Corey held up an official-looking document. This policy creates guidelines for allowing service animals and beloved pets to visit patients in all wards, including critical care, under appropriate supervision. Sarah Jenkins beamed from her seat beside Officer Rodriguez. The protocol had been her brainchild, inspired by witnessing firsthand how Rex's presence had accelerated Corey's healing. She had worked tirelessly with hospital administration and health department officials to develop safety measures that would protect patients while acknowledging the therapeutic value of animal companionship. Additionally, Corey continued, his voice strengthening with pride, the department has established a specialized K-9 medical response unit trained to detect seizures and other medical emergencies before traditional symptoms appear. He gestured toward 3 officers seated with German shepherds at their sides. These teams will be available to assist individuals with epilepsy and other seizure disorders in our community. The audience applauded as Corey described how the program would function, providing specially trained dogs to families who couldn't afford private service animals. The funding had come from an unexpected source, a foundation established by the hospital's board chair after witnessing Rex's uncanny ability to detect Corey's seizure before medical equipment registered any abnormalities. Finally, Corey said, his expression growing solemn, I want to address the difficult truth that emerged during my recovery. The betrayal by Officer Harrison was devastating to our department and to me personally. He paused, gathering himself. His actions were inexcusable, but they've led to important changes in how we support officers struggling with resentment and professional disappointment. Captain Wilkins stood and joined Corey at the podium. The Harrison incident forced us to examine the competitive culture we'd inadvertently fostered, the captain explained. We've implemented mandatory peer counseling and a more transparent promotion process. We can't change what happened to Sergeant Masterson, but we can ensure it never happens again. The media had covered Harrison's trial extensively, reporting his guilty plea to attempted murder and his sentence of 20 years in state prison. What hadn't been widely shared was Corey's private meeting with his former colleague 2 weeks earlier. A difficult conversation where Corey had offered, if not forgiveness, then at least an end to active hatred. I needed to see him, Corey had explained to Sarah afterward, to understand how someone I trusted could do this, and to tell him that he failed not just in killing me but in destroying my faith in people. As the formal presentation concluded, Corey and Rex moved to the reception area where a celebration had been arranged. Though still on limited duty, desk work and community outreach rather than active patrol, Corey had recently been promoted to lieutenant, overseeing the expanded K-9 program. You clean up nice, Lieutenant, Officer Rodriguez teased, approaching with a glass of sparkling cider, though I think Rex is stealing your spotlight. She wasn't wrong. The German Shepherd was the center of attention, accepting treats and admiration with dignified patience. Children from the local elementary school, who had sent cards throughout Corey's recovery, crowded around, eager to pet the dog they'd seen on television. He deserves every bit of it, Corey replied, watching his partner with undisguised affection. Still can't believe the department let me keep him after I was promoted. Standard procedure would have been to reassign him to active duty with another handler. Some bonds shouldn't be broken, Rodriguez said simply. Besides, who else could handle him? You two have your own language now. It was true. During Corey's recovery, he and Rex had developed a communication system that went beyond typical handler-dog interactions. Small gestures, specific vocalizations, even subtle changes in breathing patterns formed a complex dialogue between them. The neurologists had documented it extensively, fascinated by how the relationship had created new neural pathways in Corey's injured brain. Dr. Simmons approached next, more relaxed than Corey had ever seen her in a social setting. Your speech was excellent, she said, though I notice you left out the part where you threatened to discharge yourself against medical advice if we didn't allow Rex in your hospital room. Corey laughed, the sound still somewhat rough but genuine. Didn't seem appropriate for a formal presentation. Besides, you came around eventually. "Evidence changed my assessment," she replied with professional dignity, though a smile tugged at her lips. "I've spent my career trusting in science and proven medical protocols, but your case," she hesitated, searching for the right words, "your case reminded me that healing isn't just biological. There are connections we don't fully understand yet." As the reception continued, Sarah Jenkins joined them, proudly showing Corey her new identification badge. After coordinating his home care so successfully, she had been hired by the hospital as their first animal-assisted therapy coordinator, responsible for implementing the very protocol named in Corey's honor. "First official day is next Monday," she announced. "We already have 5 therapy dogs approved for visitation and 3 more in training." "None as good as Rex," Corey said with mock seriousness, earning an affectionate eye roll from Sarah. "Obviously, but they'll learn." As afternoon faded into evening, the crowd gradually thinned. Captain Wilkins approached for a final conversation before heading back to the precinct. "You've done good work, Masterson," he said gruffly, the closest he came to emotional expression. "Not just surviving, but making something meaningful from it. The department's better for it." "Thank you, sir," Corey replied, genuinely moved by the rare praise. "Your ex-wife called the station this morning," Wilkins added casually. "Said she's moving back to Southdale next month, teaching position at the high school." Corey nodded, unsurprised. He and Beth had reconnected during his recovery, their previous differences diminished by the perspective that nearly losing one's life could bring. They weren't rushing back into romance, but the friendship they'd rediscovered felt like enough for now. As the community room emptied, Corey found himself alone with Rex, the last lingering moments of a day that represented both an ending and a beginning. He lowered himself carefully to the floor, sitting eye to eye with the dog who had saved his life in more ways than one. "Just you and me again, partner," he said softly, running his hand along Rex's sleek coat. "Ready to go home?" Rex's response was immediate, a gentle press of his forehead against Corey's chest, their own private gesture of affirmation. Together they made their way out of the building, moving at the measured pace that had become their new normal. Outside, the first substantial snowfall of the season had begun, transforming the municipal parking lot into a winterscape of gentle white. Rex paused, lifting his face to catch snowflakes on his muzzle, his joy in the simple pleasure evident in the playful swish of his tail. Corey stood watching, suddenly overwhelmed by gratitude for this ordinary moment, standing in the snow with his dog, breathing cold air into healing lungs, feeling the weight of his service weapon at his hip and the solid earth beneath his feet. All things that might never have been his to experience again. "Good boy, Rex," he whispered, the words carrying all the weight of their shared journey. "The very best boy." As they walked to the car, their tracks left parallel impressions in the fresh snow. Man and dog moving forward together, each step a small victory, each day a gift neither took for granted. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.